Maybe you've felt that kind of silence before. The kind that fills a room not because there's nothing to say, but because saying it would break something that can't be fixed. That was the kind of silence I sat in the night I found out my husband had been unfaithful. It wasn't loud. It wasn't messy. There were no screams, no broken plates, no slamming doors. Just silence. I remember sitting at our kitchen table, my hands resting on a cup of coffee that had already gone cold, and realizing that the home I thought we had built together wasn't as whole as I believed. It started with something small. A feeling, really. You know how you can tell when someone you love begins to drift away? They're there, but they're not there. The conversations get shorter, the smiles less real, the hugs a little hesitant, like they're already halfway somewhere else. I told myself it was just work. He'd been busy, distracted, tired. That's what I kept saying to myself, because believing that was easier than believing anything else. We'd been married 15 years. We had built our lives together from nothing. 2 kids, a home with the kind of creaks and dents that only come from love and years of living. He used to bring me coffee in bed every Sunday morning. It was his way of saying, "I see you," even when words were few. Somewhere along the way, those small gestures stopped. Life became practical. We talked about bills, schedules, groceries, everything except us. One evening, I noticed he'd started carrying his phone with him everywhere, even into the bathroom. He used to leave it on the counter without thinking twice, but now it was glued to his hand. I told myself not to worry. "Trust him," I said. "You've built too much together to start doubting now." But deep down, there was a whisper, soft, persistent, unsettling. Then came the moment that broke that whisper wide open. It was a Thursday night. I didn't ask that night. I couldn't. I just went to bed early, turned to my side, and stared at the wall while he came in quietly, thinking I was asleep. I heard the click of his phone again, that tiny sound of a screen lighting up in the dark. That was the moment I knew. I didn't need proof. Sometimes your soul recognizes betrayal long before your mind does. For a few days, I carried that knowledge alone. I went about my routine, packing lunches, doing laundry, making dinner, but everything felt like I was underwater. Sounds were muffled, colors dimmer. When he kissed me goodbye in the morning, my body still reacted like it used to, leaning in automatically, but my heart stayed still. I started noticing more signs. The cologne he never used to wear, the late nights that ran long, the distant look in his eyes when I spoke. One morning, I stood in front of the bathroom mirror, toothbrush in hand, and asked myself, what am I so afraid of? The answer was simple, the truth. Because once I asked him, once I heard it out loud, I would never be able to go back. And a part of me wasn't ready to lose the illusion, not yet. But life has a way of forcing you to face what you're avoiding. That weekend, I found the message. He'd left his phone on the counter for the first time in weeks. I wasn't even looking for anything. I just wanted to set a reminder for groceries. And the screen lit up with a message that read, "Last night was perfect. I miss you already." There it was, 7 words that changed everything. I didn't confront him right away. I sat down. My hands were shaking, but my mind was calm. Too calm, almost. I made dinner that night, just like always. Chicken, rice, and his favorite corn casserole. He ate, he smiled, he said thank you, like nothing had changed. I watched him and thought, you don't even know that I know. And that broke me more than the message itself. That night, after he fell asleep, I went to the porch and sat there in the dark. The crickets were chirping, the air was cool, and I remember thinking, this is what heartbreak sounds like. Quiet, almost peaceful, but endless. Maybe you've been there too, sitting in that stillness, wondering when exactly love slipped through your fingers. I used to think betrayal came with shouting and drama, but sometimes it just comes with silence and a cup of cold coffee at 2 a.m. That was the night I decided I'd have to talk to him. Not because I wanted to save the marriage, not yet. I didn't even know what I wanted, but because I couldn't keep living in silence. I needed the truth, even if it hurt. The next morning when he came downstairs, I asked quietly, "Can we talk?" He looked surprised, a little nervous. "Sure," he said, setting his mug down. I took a deep breath and asked, "Is there someone else?" There was a pause, just long enough for the air to thicken, and in that silence, I already had my answer. He didn't deny it. He didn't even look angry that I'd asked. He just looked defeated, like he'd been waiting for this conversation and was relieved it had finally come. "I didn't mean for it to happen," he said softly. I nodded. I didn't cry. I didn't yell. I just sat there listening to the sound of my own heartbeat, steady and slow. Because sometimes the loudest thing in the room isn't what's said, it's what isn't. And that's where the unraveling began, not with a fight, but with truth. After that morning, the air in the house changed. Not in a dramatic way. No shouting, no slammed doors, just quieter, like the walls were holding their breath. We still moved through the motions of everyday life. We still ate breakfast at the same table, still spoke about bills, about the kids, about the weather, but everything felt hollow. Every word between us carried a shadow. He slept on the couch that first night, not because I asked him to, but because he knew he couldn't sleep beside me and pretend things were okay. I lay in our bed, staring at the empty space next to me, thinking about how love can vanish so quietly, like air leaving a balloon. You don't even notice it until it's just gone. In the mornings, I'd make coffee for both of us, out of habit, but he'd hesitate before taking it, like he wasn't sure if he deserved that small kindness anymore. Maybe he didn't, but I wasn't doing it for him. I was doing it because I needed to hold on to who I was, the woman who loved deeply, who forgave easily, who still believed in goodness, even when life turned dark. There were moments when I wanted to scream, to ask him why. Why throw away years of love, trust, and quiet mornings together for something temporary? But every time I opened my mouth, the words stuck in my throat. What answer could possibly make sense? There's no good reason for betrayal. He tried to explain. He said things like, "I felt unseen," and "I didn't mean for it to go that far." I listened. I didn't interrupt, because maybe I needed to hear it, not to forgive him yet, but to understand what had really happened to us. When you've been married for years, you start believing that love will protect you from everything. But sometimes love doesn't disappear all at once. It just gets tired. It stops showing up. That's what happened to us. We stopped showing up for each other. I think the hardest part wasn't the cheating itself. It was realizing how far apart we'd grown before it even happened. I had been so focused on the kids, on work, on keeping the house together, that I didn't notice how lonely he had become. And maybe he didn't notice how lonely I was, too. One night, I asked him, "Do you love her?" He shook his head immediately. "No," he said. "It's over. It was never real." But then his eyes softened, and he whispered, "I don't know if I know how to love anyone right now." That was the first time I felt pity instead of anger. Not because what he did was forgivable, but because I realized he was lost in his own way. People hurt others not always out of cruelty, but out of emptiness. And that emptiness can swallow a person whole if they don't face it. The morning we decided to tell the children, the world outside looked calm, almost too calm. The sun slipped gently through the kitchen blinds, turning the dust in the air into tiny floating sparkles. It was strange how peaceful everything looked when my heart was breaking in such a quiet way. He sat across from me at the table, his hands clasped, his coffee untouched. For a long while, we didn't speak. We didn't need to. The silence between us had become its own language. When the kids came down, they were still half asleep, still wrapped in the innocence of not knowing. I could hardly look at them. I thought about all the times I'd told them that home was forever, that love meant staying, that families didn't break. And yet, here we were. He started to speak first. His voice trembled a little. "Your mom and we've been talking," he said, glancing at me as if asking permission to continue. I gave a small nod. "We've decided that it might be best if we live apart for a while," he said. Our daughter's face twisted in confusion. "Apart? Like a break?" she asked. I wanted to tell her yes, that it was just a small break, that everything would go back to normal soon, but I couldn't lie. "No, sweetheart," I said softly. "We love you both very much, but sometimes grown-ups stop being good for each other." The silence that followed was heavier than any shouting could have been. My son stared at his plate, his small fingers gripping his fork. My daughter started to cry quietly, and before I could stop myself, I reached across the table and held her hand. I wanted her to feel that love hadn't disappeared, it had only changed shape. That night, after they went to bed, I walked into what used to be our bedroom. The closet door was open. Half of it was empty now. His shirts, his shoes, his smell, gone. Just hangers swinging softly, touching each other with the faintest sound, like echoes of a life that used to be full. I sat on the bed and ran my hand over the quilt my mother had made for us years ago. She'd sewn our initials in one corner, back when she believed, like I did, that love meant forever. I wondered what she would say now. Maybe she'd tell me that sometimes strength doesn't look like holding on, it looks like letting go. The first night without him felt strange. The house creaked differently. The silence pressed in from all sides. I kept waiting to hear his keys in the door, his footsteps down the hall, but the sound never came. Just the ticking of the clock, marking the beginning of something new and the end of something old. In the weeks that followed, I went through the motions of normal life: work, groceries, laundry, but everything carried an echo of what used to be. When I made dinner, I'd catch myself setting out 4 plates instead of 3. When I folded the laundry, I'd still separate his socks by instinct. It's funny how habits linger long after love has gone. He still came by to see the kids. He was polite, careful, almost too gentle. I could see the guilt sitting on his shoulders like a weight he didn't know how to carry. But I didn't want to make him suffer. Not anymore. I had realized something important. Forgiveness wasn't about him deserving it, it was about me deserving peace. One evening, as he was leaving, he turned to me at the door and said quietly, "You're stronger than I ever knew." That night, I poured myself a cup of tea and sat by the window. The moonlight spilled across the kitchen floor, and I thought about how life keeps moving, even when your heart feels like it's standing still. The world doesn't stop for heartbreak, it waits for you to catch up. I started journaling again, something I hadn't done in years. I wrote about small things: the smell of coffee in the morning, the sound of rain on the roof, the way my daughter's laughter filled the living room. I wanted to remind myself that beauty still existed, even in the ruins. Then, one Sunday, I found something unexpected. I was cleaning the garage, sorting through old boxes, when I found a letter tucked inside an old photo album. It was from him, dated years ago, before we were married. The handwriting was younger, messier. It read, "If I ever hurt you, I hope you remember that it was never because you weren't enough. It would only be because I forgot how to be the man you saw in me. I sat there for a long time, holding that letter, tears running down my face. Not angry tears, but the kind that come when you finally see something clearly. He hadn't betrayed me because I failed. He betrayed me because he had lost sight of himself. That realization was the moment I truly began to forgive him, because I understood that holding on to resentment would only keep me tied to the pain, and I wanted to be free. The turning point wasn't some grand moment. It was quiet, like everything else in this story. It came one morning when I looked in the mirror and saw not a broken woman, but a woman still standing, tired, maybe, but still here, still capable of love, laughter, and light. That day, I stopped asking, "Why me?" and started whispering, "Thank you. Thank you for the lesson. Thank you for the strength. Thank you for the chance to begin again." I realized I couldn't control what happened, only how I carried it forward, and I decided to carry it with grace. The months that followed felt like living inside a long sigh, the kind that comes after crying too long, when the body finally accepts that it has to breathe again. I started to find a rhythm to my days, though it was nothing like the one I used to know. Morning coffee alone, soft music while I made breakfast for the kids, a quiet moment by the window before leaving for work. Every small act felt like learning to walk again. Sometimes I stumbled, sometimes I stood tall, but I kept going. People often talk about healing like it's a straight line, as if you move neatly from heartbreak to peace. But it's not like that at all. Healing is more like the tide. Some days I woke up feeling calm, confident, free. Other days, the grief came rushing back, flooding everything. But the more it came, the more I learned to let it pass. You can't fight the tide. You just stand in it until it softens. He still called sometimes, mostly about the children, but occasionally to ask if I was doing all right. At first, those calls felt strange, like hearing a familiar song through static. I didn't know how to feel, but I learned to answer with kindness. Not because I wanted him back, but because I wanted to live without bitterness. You see, bitterness doesn't protect you. It just builds walls that block the sunlight. One evening, he stopped by to drop off our son's school project. It was late autumn and the air was cool. He lingered at the doorway holding the project like it was a peace offering. We talked for a moment about work, the kids, the weather. Then, just before he left, he said softly, "I never stopped caring about you." I looked at him, the man I had once built a whole life around, the man who had broken it apart, and for the first time, I didn't feel anger or longing or pain. I felt compassion. "I know," I said, "and that's enough." That night, I sat by the fire with a blanket around my shoulders, listening to the wood crackle. I realized I wasn't lonely anymore. I was alone, yes, but there's a difference. Loneliness is an ache. Aloneness is peace. It's the quiet understanding that you can be whole without someone else to complete you. Over time, the house began to change too. I rearranged the furniture, painted the kitchen walls a soft cream color, bought new curtains that caught the morning light just right. I wasn't trying to erase the past. I was simply making space for the future. Every brushstroke, every small change felt like claiming a piece of myself back. The children adjusted slowly. There were tears at first, and questions I couldn't always answer. But children are resilient in ways adults often forget. They began to laugh again, to joke, to fill the house with sound. One evening, my daughter said, "Mom, you seem happier now." I smiled at her, truly smiled, and said, "I think I am," because she was right. Sometimes I'd find myself thinking about him, not with longing, but with a kind of gentle distance. I remembered the good years, the laughter, the trips, the nights we stayed up dreaming about the future.
Those memories didn't hurt anymore. They just existed, like old photographs tucked away in a drawer, part of a life once lived. I began volunteering at the local community center, helping women who were going through their own heartbreaks. Listening to their stories, I realized how many of us carry quiet pain behind brave smiles, and how sometimes all someone needs is to hear, "You'll be okay." I know, because I was too. One woman asked me once, "How did you forgive him?" I thought about that question for a long time. Then I said, forgiveness didn't happen all at once. It came little by little, every time I chose peace over pain. Every time I decided to stop replaying what went wrong and started noticing what was still right. Forgiveness isn't about letting someone off the hook. It's about freeing yourself from the weight of their mistake. It's saying, you don't get to control my heart anymore. And when I finally understood that, something inside me lifted, light as air. There was one Sunday when we both ended up at the same church service. It wasn't planned. We hadn't seen each other in weeks. After the service, he came up to me and said, "You look well." I smiled, nodded, and replied, "I am." And I meant it. That was the moment I realized the chapter had truly closed. No bitterness, no unfinished sentences, just quiet acceptance. I went home that afternoon, made a cup of tea, and opened the window. The breeze carried in the smell of cut grass and distant laughter. The world was still turning, life was still moving, and for the first time in a long while, I wasn't trying to catch up with it. I was simply part of it again. Maybe you've felt that kind of peace before, the kind that doesn't come with celebration or applause, but just settles in your heart like a soft exhale. That's what forgiveness felt like for me. Not forgetting, not pretending, just letting go. I realized something else too. Sometimes the end of one love makes space for a deeper one. The love you learned to give yourself. The love that says, I'm enough, even when everything else falls apart. And that kind of love, it doesn't end.
It's strange how quietly a heart can heal when you finally stop forcing it to. There wasn't one big moment when everything fell back into place. No sudden rush of happiness, no music swelling in the background. Just slow, steady breaths. Days that began to feel ordinary again. And you know what? Ordinary can be beautiful when you've lived through chaos. I learned to love the calm, the stillness, the silence that used to hurt. That same silence became my peace. Maybe you've felt that kind of silence before. The kind that doesn't ache anymore. It just breathes with you. I started spending my evenings on the porch, watching the sun go down. The light would spill across the sky, soft and golden, like forgiveness itself. Sometimes my daughter would sit beside me, her head resting on my shoulder, and we'd talk about everything and nothing. She didn't ask about her father much anymore, but when she did, her voice carried no anger, just curiosity. "Do you still love him?" she asked one evening, the wind gently moving her hair. I thought about it before answering. "In a way," I said. "Not the same way as before. It's not a love that needs to hold on anymore. It's the kind that wishes someone well, even from far away." She nodded, as if she understood more than I expected. Maybe children know more about forgiveness than we give them credit for. They see it in how we move, how we choose to smile even after being hurt. They learn from the quiet things. There are still moments when I catch myself remembering the laughter, the family dinners, the times I felt like everything was right in the world. But those memories don't sting now. They've turned into something else, reminders of who I was and how far I've come. You see, pain softens when you stop fighting it. It becomes part of your story, but not the whole story. One morning, I found myself in the kitchen humming a tune I hadn't thought of in years. The light coming through the window hit the countertop just right, and I felt something stir in my chest. Joy. Simple, unexpected joy. Not because everything was perfect,
but because I was still here, still standing, still finding beauty in small things. A few months later, I ran into him again at the grocery store. It was one of those ordinary moments that used to feel impossible. He looked older, maybe a little more tired, maybe a little more at peace. We exchanged a polite smile, and he asked how I was doing. I said, "I'm good, really good." And he smiled too, not with regret, but with understanding. I think he knew that forgiveness had already been given long before that day. As I walked away, I realized that this was what healing looked like. Not erasing the past, but being able to stand in it without flinching. We had both made mistakes. We had both grown. And that was enough. That night, I wrote in my journal, "Some endings are not failures. They're quiet beginnings in disguise." Maybe that's what I would tell anyone listening to this right now. The ones who feel like their heart will never stop hurting. It will. One day you'll wake up and it won't hurt the same way anymore. It'll be softer. You'll find yourself smiling again without even noticing when it started. You'll forgive, not because they asked you to, but because you're tired of carrying the pain. And when you do, you'll realize that peace was waiting for you all along. If I could go back, I wouldn't erase what happened. I wouldn't wish for a different ending. Because through all of it, the betrayal, the heartbreak, the nights I cried quietly in the dark, I found myself. The woman I used to be was always afraid of being alone. The woman I am now knows that solitude can be sacred. So yes, the secret that ended our home in one night might sound like a tragedy, but in truth, it was a turning point. It was the night I stopped waiting for someone else to make me whole. It was the night I began to listen to my own heart again. Sometimes I still talk to him in my mind, not with anger, but with gratitude. I tell him, "Thank you for teaching me that even broken things can shine." And as I say that, I look around my quiet home, the flicker of the candle on the table, the laughter of my children in the next room, the gentle hum of the evening, and I know, with all the peace in my soul, that I am exactly where I'm meant to be. Because forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. It means freeing yourself from the story of pain and choosing to write a new one filled with grace, quiet strength, and love that begins from within. And if you're listening to this right now, maybe you needed to hear that too. Maybe this is your reminder that no matter what you've lost, you still have yourself. And that's where your healing begins. Maybe you felt that kind of silence before, the one that used to hurt, but now feels like peace.
There's something sacred about the quiet that comes after a storm. At first, it feels too still, almost empty, like life has forgotten how to move forward. But then you start to notice things you never saw before: the soft hum of the refrigerator, the birds outside your window, the way sunlight hits the curtains in the morning. Life never stopped. I had just been too lost in pain to see it. I remember the first time I slept through the night without waking up in tears. It wasn't planned, and I didn't even realize it until I woke up and saw the morning light spilling across the room. For the first time in months, I didn't wake up thinking about what I'd lost. I woke up thinking about what I still had: my home, my children, my peace, myself. Healing isn't loud. It doesn't come with fanfare or sudden breakthroughs. It comes in whispers, in the small choices we make every day, choosing not to reread the old messages, choosing not to replay the arguments in your mind, choosing to make breakfast, to water the plants, to open the windows again. That's what forgiveness looks like in real life, not a grand gesture, but quiet courage repeated over time. Sometimes people ask me, "Don't you wish you'd never found out?" And the truth is, no, because knowing the truth, even when it broke me, set me free. It allowed me to stop living in a dream built on lies. It gave me a chance to rebuild, not the same life, but a more honest one. There's beauty in honesty even when it hurts. It's like standing in front of a mirror and finally seeing yourself clearly. No more pretending, no more waiting for someone to change.
just acceptance of what was and what will be. Months turned into a year, and by then, the rhythm of my life had changed completely. I learned to cook for one without feeling lonely. I learned to fill the silence with laughter again. Not forced, but real laughter. I met new people, not because I was searching for someone to fill the emptiness, but because I wanted to share the fullness I had found within myself. And then one evening, I stood outside during a light rain, the kind that smells like clean air and new beginnings. I closed my eyes and let it touch my face, and I whispered, "I forgive you." Not to him, not even out loud, just to the universe. And as strange as it sounds, I could almost feel something lift off my shoulders, like the air around me had softened. That's when I realized forgiveness isn't something you give once, it's something you keep giving. To yourself, every day you wake up and choose peace instead of bitterness. Sometimes when I pass by places that hold old memories, the cafe where we used to sit, the park where we took family photos, I don't feel that sharp sting anymore. Instead, I feel gratitude. Gratitude that I got to love, even if it didn't last forever. Gratitude that I learned how strong I could be when life tested me. I've stopped asking, why did this happen to me? And started asking, what did this teach me? And the answer is always the same, that love in all its forms is still worth it, even when it hurts, even when it ends, because love transforms us, even through loss. Now, when people tell me their stories of heartbreak or betrayal, I listen quietly. I don't tell them to move on. I just tell them, you'll find peace in your own time. Because we all do, eventually. It comes slowly, softly, and one morning, it just stays. And maybe that's what I want you to take from my story. That sometimes the end of something beautiful isn't the end of you. It's just the end of a chapter that was never meant to last forever. And what comes next, that's the story you get to write with your own hands on your own terms. When I look back now, I don't see the night everything fell apart. I see the morning after, the one where I took my first breath as a woman finally free of pretending. That's the memory I keep close. If you're listening to this, maybe your heart feels heavy right now. Maybe someone you trusted broke something inside you. If so, I want you to know this. You will be okay. You will smile again. You will trust again. And one day, you'll look back and realize that your pain shaped you into someone softer, wiser, and infinitely stronger. Because forgiveness isn't weakness. It's power. The quiet kind that doesn't need to prove itself. It's the kind that lets you walk away with peace in your heart, knowing you did your best, and that's enough. So, yes, I forgave him. Not for him, but for me. Because life is too short to keep living in yesterday's sorrow. And as I stand here now, watching the world move gently outside my window, I whisper one last thing to myself. I'm free. And that's the truth.
Sometimes, when the story ends, the silence that follows feels like it might last forever. But over time, that silence becomes something else, a space for peace to grow. I've learned that not every ending is a tragedy. Some endings are simply quiet beginnings in disguise. You see, when I look back now, I don't see a broken marriage or a man who betrayed me. I see a woman who found herself again. A woman who remembered that she was worthy of love. Not the kind that asks her to shrink, but the kind that allows her to breathe. There's this moment, right before dawn, when everything is still. No cars, no birds, just quiet air, and the faint hum of the world waking up. That's what forgiveness feels like. It's not dramatic, it's just peace. The kind that doesn't need to explain itself to anyone. If you've ever been where I was, standing in the wreckage of something you thought would last forever, I hope you remember this. It's okay to be gentle with yourself. Healing doesn't follow a timeline. It doesn't care what other people think you should be over by now. It comes when it's ready. And when it does,
It will feel like sunlight on your face after a long night of rain. Some people will never say they're sorry. Some will never understand the hurt they caused. But you can still forgive them, not because they deserve it, but because you deserve peace, because your heart deserves to rest. And one day, without even realizing it, you'll notice that the memories don't sting anymore. You'll talk about what happened and your voice won't tremble. You'll feel calm. That's when you'll know you made it through. You did the hardest part. So, tonight, as you listen to my story, I want you to take a deep breath. Let it go. Whatever you've been holding, the anger, the blame, the endless why, just set it down. You don't need to carry it anymore. Maybe you felt that kind of silence before, the kind that comes after everything breaks. But maybe, like me, you'll also find that silence isn't empty at all. It's just space. Space for something new, something gentler to begin. Thank you for listening to my story. If it touched your heart, if you saw a piece of your own life somewhere in mine, I want you to know you're not alone. We all have stories that hurt to tell, but every story, even the painful ones, carries a small light inside it. Sometimes you just have to sit in the quiet long enough to see it. So wherever you are tonight, be kind to yourself. You're doing better than you think. And if this story spoke to you, if it reminded you of your own journey through heartbreak, forgiveness, or healing, I'd love to hear from you. Have you ever had to forgive someone, not for them, but for your own peace? This is the end of my story, the secret that ended our home in one night. But maybe for someone listening, it's the beginning of forgiveness. Good night, and take care of your heart.